All right, we are recording. So we have Richard Miranda with us. He has a lot of titles, but just to highlight a few, he was on the 2020 NAR Board of Directors. He is chair of NAR's Global Alliances Advisory Board. He is a CIPS instructor, and he is the 2020 National Association of Realtors Global Ambassador to Mexico, Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, and Nicaragua. So thank you for joining us. A few administrative things. This course was approved for CE credit, so thank you to the associations who have set up this course for us this morning. It's an hour long. Feel free to ask questions at the end. Right now you all are muted, so if you have any questions, feel free to scroll your mouse over the screen and use the Q&A question down at the bottom. For those who are joining at a local association, just wave frantically at the screen and I'll go ahead and unmute you so you can ask your question. Finally, this course will be recorded. It is being recorded right now. And at the end of the webinar, I will go ahead and upload it to the Texas Realtors website under past webinars. And it will also be uploaded to the Global and Commercial Texas Realtors YouTube channel playlist. So you can find it there. Without further ado, Richard, go ahead and share your screen and your presentation. And we look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you. I will do that right now. Let's put this under the slideshow. Slideshow from beginning. Okay, great. So, good morning, everybody. Texas, Odessa, Metrotex, Odessa, Brownsville, El Paso, I think is in here also. Thank you very much, all you guys, for joining us in this webinar this morning. We'll try to cover as much as we can, and of course there's a lot of material to cover, but nevertheless I think we should be able to do pretty well in the next 50 minutes. So what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about real estate practices in Mexico, and we'll just go ahead and get started. The objectives of this session today is to introduce you, the audience, to the requirements to practice real estate in Mexico. Also to review the mechanics of the real estate transactions, as well as the role of AMPI. AMPI is the acronym for the Asociación Mexicana de Profesionales Inmobiliarios. AMPI is the equivalent of NAR in Mexico, and they cover the entire country. We'll go into more detail in a few minutes. And of course, we also will talk about some do's and don'ts when you're trying to expand your business into Mexico. The first point is that if you want to become an AMPI member, we're going to make assumptions throughout this webinar, and we're going to make the assumption that you are currently residing in Mexico. Let's say that you were residing in Mexico and you want to become an AMPI member. So what you do, you apply for membership at the local chapter. There's about 70 local chapters, and most of these local chapters are located in the larger cities of each state. Mexico has a total of 33 states plus the what they used to call the federal district, which is kind of like our Washington, D.C. type of thing. So they changed all that around, so it's not called Mexico DF or Distrito Federal, it's just called Ciudad de Mexico, Mexico City. So anyway, if you are living in one of the 33 states and you want to apply for membership to AMPI, first you go to the local level, kind of like what you would do here in Texas. If you live, say, for example, in Houston, you would apply into the Houston Association of Realtors, which automatically then, when you become a member of HAR, you also become a member of Texas Realtors, and you also become a member of the National Association of Realtors. It's kind of like automatic. In Mexico, it's very similar. When you enter into a membership into the local AMPI chapter, say, for example, Playa del Carmen or Monterrey or Mexico City or Guadalajara or any other city, you actually become a member of the local chapter, and the national chapter, which is what they call AMPI Nacional. You pay the respective dues, and it depends. There's 2 or 3 types of different dues, whether you are a broker or whether you're an associate. A similar structure to what we have here. You know, in Texas, we have the salesperson license, and then after several years or a certain amount of transactions, you can apply for your broker license. It's a similar like that in Mexico City, in Mexico. Is there a requirement for a license? Yes and no. It depends on the state. I have a couple of slides that show which states require licensing, which states require registration. They do not have a national license. They're not interested in getting a national license because the real estate laws in each state are a little different from each other, very similar to what we have here in the U.S. Each state controls, here in the U.S., each state controls and regulates the real estate practice. There is no national real estate license in the U.S. Excuse me. So it depends on the state. And we'll go over that in a little while, and I'll show you which states require licensing and which states require licensing and registration. All right, so now you must have the ability to pass a competency test and register at the state level. The state requires you to register at the state level, even though you're a member of AMPI. There is no state associations anywhere in Mexico. There's just 2 layers. The local association, which would be the equivalent of, say, Odessa Realtors or Brownsville Realtors or MetroTex or ABOR or SABOR. That would be the local association. But we do have another layer, which is the Texas Realtors, the state association. And then, of course, on top of that, we have the national. In Mexico, there is only 2 layers, not 3. Okay, so who can practice real estate in Mexico? You want to see the short answer? Anyone, from a cab driver to a waiter to an airline pilot to an airline flight attendant to a waiter, or I may have said that, but anybody in Mexico can practice real estate. You do not have to have a license to practice real estate in Mexico because there's no law nationwide or statewide that requires you to have the license to be able to practice. It is kind of a little bit of interesting that even though some states have passed registration and regulation laws, you do not have to become a registered real estate agent to be able to practice. There is a clause written in the Mexican Constitution that prohibits a specific industry from boycotting or having in some places what we call like a closed shop. So according to the Mexican Constitution, again, anybody who wants to do anything, any kind of job, any kind of career can pursue it. Of course, if you want to be a doctor in Mexico, you've got to get trained, and then you have to pass exams. And the same thing with attorneys. And this is exactly where the Mexican Association, AMPI, is trying to get to that point, so that anybody and everybody in Mexico who wants to practice real estate becomes licensed and registered. But as of right now, there is no way to restrict anybody from practicing real estate. What it does, having the registration and having the license, it creates a lot more of a, trust and competency, so that if you're visiting with a client and the client is, say, interviewing a real estate agent that does not have licensing or registration, and he or she is also interviewing a practitioner who has all the licensing requirements and has passed the competency test at the state level and does have a license and a registration certificate, that person has a lot more credibility than the one that does not. So it definitely improves and helps the Mexican real estate practitioner who has a license and a registration to be able to present himself or herself with a much higher level of value added. Same thing as we have here, except in the US, you cannot practice real estate unless you have a license in any state in the US. All right, so listing and registration. There are 19 states of the 33 that have a registration and a licensing requirement. And there's going to be more, because this started about 5 years ago, 6 years ago, with only one state. The state of Sonora was the very first state that required licensing and registration. And it's been an uphill battle because a lot of the legislators at the state level don't feel that they need to create this type of registration and reglementation to be able to protect the industry and or protect the consumer rights. But I think, as a matter of fact, the more that states join into the jump in the bandwagon regarding licensing and registrations, more will follow, because they get to realize that it's inevitable. I think it will happen in another 5 years. I think Mexico, all the states in Mexico will require licensing and or licensing and registration. It's just a matter of time. Of course, when you want to become licensed and registered in Mexico, you have to pass a test at the state level. And you also must have something that some agents who are practicing real estate do not have, and that's a residency requirement. There's a situation in many of the cities in Mexico that are, say, resorts and areas of second homes. And an example of some of those areas would be Playa del Carmen, Cancun, Vallarta, Cabo, and even places like San Miguel Allende, even though it's not a resort coast town. But the problem is that a lot of the people that are practicing real estate in those places are what we call expats, meaning people from the US that have gone down there to live. And unfortunately, they do not follow the true sense of the laws, and they don't. Some of them have tourist visas, and they come back and forth every 6 months and to renew the visa. But there are quite a few practicing real estate, stateside real estate agents in Mexico, practicing real estate without, of course, the requirements of being the resident. That does not mean that they don't know what they're doing. It just means that they don't have the residency, which is actually a requirement to be able to practice. So a lot of these people are bending the rules, unfortunately. All right, so if you get your real estate license in the states that require it, it's good for 2 years, similar to Texas, where your license is good for 2 years. But the state law specifically says this is what your list of duties and obligations are. It's a very long. It's about every state has the licensing law. It's about 11 pages long, because I've read a couple of them, and it details exactly what a real estate agent is supposed to be doing for a client. We have something like that also, right? We have our laws of agency and our laws of contracts dictate pretty much exactly what it is that we have to do, in addition to the code of ethics. So we have two sets of rules that we have to follow: the NAR code of ethics, and of course the state laws regarding the practice. So they meaning the states can also invoke penalties and violations for people who are violating the real estate laws. However, because most of these laws are fairly new, there are no uniform sets of laws that are being currently written to be able to address people who bend the rules. Or, sorry for that phone call. It'll stop ringing in a minute. It did. So unfortunately, there's still not a lot of uniform laws that are written in it, you know, in all these states, because it's a brand new thing. And excuse me for 30 seconds, they're gonna run and get me some water. Okay, I'm back. Do we have any questions so far? We'll have a question and answer after the session. So if you have questions, just write them down and we'll address them as they come in. Okay, so moving on. This is the list that states have registration and licensing. There's two slides, this one and the previous one. There are 19 states that require registration and licensing. However, they're not the same thing. Registration is one thing, and then the licensing is the other thing. Before you get licensed, you have to register. When you register, you fill out a form, you ask for the licensing, and that to get the license, you have to have that competency exam that will allow you then to get an ID card that says that you're a real estate practitioner, register and verify that you're competent in your discipline. So if you can see, starting with Baja California, that's where, of course, Baja California has the licensing and the registration requirements. If you see further down the list, the name of Sonora, I put it first there because that was the very first state that required registration and licensing. Guanajuato and the state of Mexico, there is a state and a city with the same name. They don't have to have licensing just yet. They're only gone as far as creating a law for registration. And in Veracruz also. Over here in Querétaro, you have to have both. In other cities or states like Guanajuato, and you can read the other ones, Coahuila, Guerrero, Campeche, Michoacán, the city of Mexico, they do not require licensing yet. They just require registration. Baja California Sur, where San Jose de Cabo and Cabo San Lucas are located, you got to have both, and so on and so forth. Ironically, in Quintana Roo, which is where Cancun and Playa del Carmen are located, they have to have both. But there's a lot of people still, a lot of expats living in Playa and in Cancun that have practiced in real estate without having a registered or without having to be licensed. And I know why. Because a lot of these people that are practicing, these expats that are practicing real estate in those cities, do not speak Spanish. So they would not be able to pass the exam in Spanish. And that's why they're not licensed. That's a shame, but that's a reality. All right, so moving on, let's talk about the mechanics of the transaction. So there's obviously, as you know, there's always two types of transactions in real estate, the side of the buyer side and the seller side. Let's just talk about these buyers first. And we're going to make assumptions that the buyer is going to be looking for say a 2-bedroom condo near the beach so that he or she can either retire there or lease it out a little bit, Airbnb it, or go and live with it during certain periods of the year. So how does a buyer, if you and I, for example, are looking for properties in Playa or in Vallarta or in Cabo, how do we find them? There are a lot of listing platforms in Mexico. There are no MLSs as we know them here, but there's a lot of listing platforms. Some of the ones that are most common is one called Point2. There's another one called Easy Broker, and there's another one which is predominantly in the cities of Cabo and Vallarta, is called Multilist. These are not MLSs as we know them, so be aware of that. We have an MLS where we get an unconditional promise of compensation and an unconditional promise of cooperation. So these concepts are not yet fully developed and known nationwide in Mexico. So that is something that they're working towards, but it's not there yet. So I'm the buyer, I find the property, and then the next thing, I meet with an agent because I can't buy the property by myself. I gotta have some kind of professional help. So I meet an agent, and the agent start the process, which is to a point similar to what you would be doing if you had a buyer here. You interview the buyer and you talk to them, you find out what their money's coming from, you find out exactly what they're looking for. And if they see the property online, but then you show it to them physically and they don't like it, then you can bring that agent into your platform and into your portfolio, and then he becomes your client. Just, you know, very similar to what we do here in the U.S. Except in Mexico, they don't have such devices as buyer's representation agreement, the BRAs, that we are familiar with here in Texas. So the agency relationship in Mexico is formed, but it's not formalized in a contract. Many agents in Mexico work without listing contracts or buyer rep agreement contracts. So then the next step is, of course, the agent will help prepare you the what do you call the contract of intent. Here in Texas, we have the 1 to 4, which we submit in behalf of our client, the buyer, and then that contract, that offer, that paperwork, once it's accepted by the seller, it actually becomes the purchase contract. In Mexico, that does not happen. In Mexico, you have to have a contract of intent, which can be prepared by the agent or it can be prepared by the broker in that office. And then once it's that intent of that, it's kind of like a letter of intent in the commercial side. Once that offer is accepted by the seller, then you go find an attorney, and the attorney writes the purchase contract and the escrituras, which is the deed. And all the details of the transaction go into the contract of intent, and that's what the attorney or the notario would use as a template to be able to write up the entire purchase contract. Okay, so going on, escrow. Sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't. Escrow is not a familiar term in Mexico, and it's not widely used. It is used, however, in many areas where you have a lot of Anglos and Canadians and European people, well, not Europeans, but Canadians and the Americans are the ones that use escrow. If it's a sale between a Mexican and another Mexican, they do not use escrow. They just deliver the money to the seller, or, and believe it or not, they still have situations where the money is accepted by the seller's agent against every law in the book, but they still operate sometimes that way. So if you don't have an escrow agent, if you don't have an escrow organization to take care of the money, the deposit, an agent is not supposed to take the deposit, but the notarios, who is the attorney, will hold it. Now, the foreign buyer process is very different than a Mexican national, especially in what we call the restricted areas, because they have to set up a trust. I don't know if you heard the word trust, or in Spanish it's called fideicomiso. That is a requirement that persons who are not Mexican nationals must follow to be able to buy a property in what is called a restricted zone. The restricted zone is, I'm going to show you right now. Let's go back here. The restricted zone on the bottom of the slide, you can see that is 50 kilometers from the coast or 100 kilometers from the border. That translated would be 35 miles from the coast or 60 miles from the border. That was done that way back in that law was in the book since 1927 after the Mexican Revolution, because they didn't want the foreigners to come in here and grab the best properties. That law was amended in 1992. There was an amendment to the Constitution allowing foreign buyers to be able to buy those properties. However, they had to buy it through a trust, a fideicomiso, in which it means that the bank, there will be a bank that is holding the deed to that property, and you are still the owner. You just cannot sell it without the permission from the bank who holds the deed in your name. And that, of course, means that you still have full ownership of the property if you're a foreign buyer. Here's the thing, though. If you want to buy a property not in the restricted zone, such as, say, San Miguel Allende or Cuernavaca, or even Mexico City, you do not have to use the trust. You can buy the property free and clear, just like you would here in the US. All right, so let's go back to the original slide. Inspections, not the norm. We here have an escrow, we have an option period where we can do the inspections and then renegotiate. That does not happen in Mexico. There's no professional inspectors or mechanical inspectors like we know them here. So if you buy a property and you want somebody to inspect it for you, then you hire an architect or you hire an engineer. Nothing to do with the house. They don't have to be licensed. They don't have to be regulated. They're just, they're professional inspectors, professional architects or professional engineers, just like here. You got to get graded and degreed and then pass exams and stuff like that. Option period, not the norm. That does not exist in Mexico. Title insurance, nope, not the norm. Title insurance is available if the buyer wishes to purchase it. The buyer needs to then contact a title insurance company such as Fidelity or First American. And there's several others. There's one in Cabo who's been operating now for about 40 years, and they're called the Settlement Company. And that was the very first title company in Mexico that started offering title insurance to the buyers since early 1960s. And now there's several that do that also. Stewart is not one of them, just for your information. Okay, escrow. Depending on the buyer's country of origin. Like I said, many Canadians and many Americans do want to use escrow because they're used to it and they feel that having an escrow will protect their investment in the event that they have to back out. So that's why it is used by the Americans and the Canadians, but not by the Mexicans. The Mexicans that are buying a property between one Mexican to another Mexican, they do not use escrow. They just give the money to the seller or give the money to the notario, and they trust the process to go that way. San Miguel Allende, Cuernavaca, the city of Mexico, those are examples of cities that are not in the restricted zone. So when you buy a property there, you own it fee simple, free and clear, just like you would here in the US. And then, of course, remember that the restricted zone is the coast and the borders. And that's, if you're not a Mexican national, you must buy the property through the fideicomiso, which is the trust. All right, sellers. The sellers typically sign several listings with several agents. There's no such thing as exclusive rights to sell. We're beginning to try to convince people to use the exclusive rights to sell verbiage on their contracts because it's just smarter way of doing it. And one of the things that I have been preaching in Mexico now for the last 5 years is the benefits of exclusivity when you're taking a listing. And I have done, it's a 1 hour shop seminar that I do. And I've done that in Mexico City, in Guadalajara, in Tijuana, in Cabo, in Monterrey, in Mexico City twice. Where else? Three or other cities where we have. I talk to these folks about the benefits of having an exclusive rights to sell, but apparently they still don't feel that that's important. I don't know if it's they just don't know how to explain it to their sellers that they're actually getting more leverage by signing an exclusive contract as opposed to signing 5 open listings with 5 agents. And I use that example. I tell them, look, if you are the real estate agent and you want to get an exclusive, but your buyer says no because I want to be able to leverage with 5 other real estate agents, my opinion would be, then you tell the seller, Mr. Seller, would you rather be leveraged with 5 agents or with all 300 agents in the city? And if you start approaching it that way, they understand then that the leverage with an exclusivity is a heck of a lot better than the leverage with 5 agents that are running around trying to avoid each other selling that property. But apparently this still hasn't caught on. But we keep trying. So it's not uncommon to see multiple signs on a property in Mexico. 2, 3, 4, yeah. It is not uncommon to see them. Photos are usually provided by the seller. The agents usually don't go in there to take pictures. They don't go in there to take room measurements either. The room measurements and the size of the properties are usually dictated by the seller. And the price of the house, where does the price come from? From the seller. The seller says, well, I think this property is worth X, or I think this property is considered Y. Now, well, I spent 500 million pesos building this property, so I'm going to charge more. So they don't have the MLS, they don't have the database that we have to be able to comparably price a property as per what the market bears. So they don't have that, so they just pull the number out of the air. And that's why you see so much negotiations, because if you have ever dealt with foreign buyers, the foreign buyers usually are people who don't understand the data that we provide on our MLS. So they usually come and tell the buyer's agent, well, offer a much lower amount, and they start by lowballing the seller, and that, well, creates problems. But that's because that's where they come from, and that's the way they do it over there. So that's one of the things that we have to educate our buyers when they're buying property here, because what they do over there in Mexico and in other countries is totally different. Now, here's the interesting thing. There are some listing platforms that require exclusivity. And there is one in San Miguel Allende, which is, I think it's called I can't remember the name of it, but it is one that's being used by a lot of the expats who are practicing there. And now it's also being used by the local Mexican agents. They're using the exclusive rights to sell as an additional leverage. And that apparently is catching on in places like San Miguel Allende and in other areas of Cabo, for example, because there's a lot of American real estate practitioners who, because that's the way they work, and it's beginning to spread. So we are seeing a gradual increase in the openness of sellers to provide exclusive rights to sell instead of open listings. But that's still a long ways from being, nationwide. All right, so let's switch gears for a second and talk about the role of AMPI. AMPI is, of course, as you know, NAR's equivalent. And their job, the role of AMPI as the organization, AMPI is a trade organization, just like NAR is. Their job is their responsibility and their mission and their vision is to train and educate its members. Same thing as NAR here. It's also charged with professionalizing the industry, which at this point, because many states do not require the licensing or the registration, it doesn't create that sense of professionalism that the real estate agents in Mexico want to achieve. So slowly but surely they're going to get there. But that's one of the roles of AMPI. They're tirelessly trying to talk to legislators and the senators and the legislators and other public figures to be able to start creating more of a critical mass to be able to start pushing more on the requirements for licensing and registration. Well, of course, they also abide by the role and the mission and the vision of protecting private property rights, and that's pretty much what most real estate companies or real estate agencies or associations do throughout the world. They do a combination of all these three things. Now, there is one national association, and then there's 60 local chapters. These 60 local chapters are located in the largest cities. Some associations, some local associations may have as many as 300 or 400 members, and some of the smaller associations may only have like 15 or 20. It is similar, like here in Texas, for example, you have very small associations in east part of Texas or in the rural areas that don't have that many, don't have too many members, but they're still there, and they fight for their rights, and then they cooperate with each other, and they're remarkable the way they work. So each chapter is autonomous, but they must adhere to the code of ethics. AMPI has their own code of ethics, and as they incorporate into, as they sign and they become parts of members of an NAR, by the way, I'll tell you, all the AMPI members are members of NAR. So if you become a member of AMPI, you are automatically enrolled into the NAR. If you become an NAR member, and you can be called Realtor and use the logo Realtor and use the title Realtor. That is a, what do we call a bilateral agreement between NAR and AMPI. And there's about 83 other associations throughout the world that have signed bilateral agreements with NAR to allow their agents to be members of NAR and benefit from the rights and the privileges and the tools and the education that NAR has to offer. So AMPI offers us that AMPI has two points of view. It offers its members on a personal level, prestige, leadership, professionalism, growth, recognition, friendship, and fraternity. And on a professional level, they provide the member with representation, the image, strength, security, education, and certifications. Very similar to what we do here at Texas Realtors. All right, let's talk about the do's and the don'ts. The do's and the don'ts for expanding your business in Mexico. Become an AMPI member. There is a very easy, inexpensive way to become an AMPI International member. You can be a Texas licensed realtor and become a member of AMPI International. If you're interested in doing that, I will get you, but you will have to contact me independently. Shoot me an email, or do it through Tiffany or through Emma, that we can get your email so that I can send you the AMPI International membership application. I think it's fairly inexpensive. The last time that I was looking at it, I think AMPI was charging $35. And they will send you, once they receive your application, they'll send you a certificate that says that you're an AMPI International member. And that allows you to go into their congresses and all the other events at a reduced rate, so that you can save some money. Here's another way to expand your business in Mexico. Attend their local events. They call them foros. It's kind of like a one-day seminar that starts at 9 o'clock in the morning. There's a whole bunch of speakers that come in and they talk about certain topics about real estate. Some of them have a 1-hour training session about photography, another training session about the local laws, another about the laundering of money, because money laundering is a very serious thing in Mexico. And they're trying to eliminate any type of impropriety like we see in some places where the money gets transferred from place to place when you're in the middle of a transaction. So they want to continue to professionalize that. And there's a lot of forums that not just talk about the money laundering and the handling of the owners or the clients' money, but also the educational side of the transaction. And they do about every large city will have one of these photos at least once a year. And of course, Excuse me. Next week, there's an AMPI International Summit. Actually, it's the 25th, not next week. Unfortunately, NAR has suspended volunteer and staff travel. So I was scheduled to go to the AMPI International Summit in the city of Mazatlan. 2 days ago, I got an email from NAR staff telling me that we were not allowed to go because of the coronavirus. So we just have to say pat and not go. But that doesn't stop anybody who's not working or representing NAR. So if you still want to go to the AMPI International Summit in Mazatlan, you certainly are, welcome. You're invited to go. You certainly can, you can go on your own, and certainly you will be welcome. Unfortunately, we cannot go as NAR representatives because that would be violating the association's policies on restricting the travel, the non-essential travel. And of course, you have to, I would recommend that one best way to expand your business in Mexico is to attend their annual national congress. They have their congress in different cities, just like NAR has different, our annual convention is done in different cities. This year, they always hold their conference in October, just like NAR holds their convention in November. And it's always in a different city. This year, the AMPI National Congress is going to be held in the city of León. León is a secondary city in what they call the Bajío, which is the central plains of Mexico. And it's a place that is just loaded with car factories. It's probably one of the largest car factories in Mexico in the León and the Guanajuato area. So one of the things that you will be impressed when you see the airplane coming in for a landing, you see these huge buildings just from horizon to horizon, and they're car companies like Ford and GM and General Motors and Chrysler. They're all building their cars on there, and so is Volkswagen and Mercedes and other German companies, and also other Japanese companies are building their cars down there. Okay, so moving on. Another way to be able to increase your business in Mexico is to start meeting and networking with the local AMPI practitioners, which is also great for referrals, because I will talk to you about listings and doing some additional business in Mexico. Remember that if you are not a resident of Mexico and you don't have the licensing that you're required, depending on the state where you may think about practicing, you don't want to do that, because you don't want to start your career in Mexico by breaking either the laws, the licensing laws, or the residency laws. So just be aware of that. The best way to do that is go back to what we were saying. You go back to the international summits, go back to their national congresos, you go to the local photos, and that's how you start meeting all these real estate agents who they'll become your friends, because they're looking for contacts also. There's a lot of Mexican real estate professionals that have clients that are looking for properties in Texas, in Dallas, in Houston, in San Antonio, in Austin, in all places. So it always behooves you to start creating a really strong relationship with as many of the AMPI realtors as you can, because I promise you that once they get to know you and like you and trust you, they will send you business. Oh yeah. And guess what? You're allowed to pay them a referral fee also. You're not breaking any laws. We checked out with the folks at Trek, and they said it's okay. If you want to do a referral fee to a Mexican real estate professional, you can do that. So that's the good news. One more thing that we recommend, this is the do's and the don'ts. One of the things that you do not want to do is take a listing in a foreign country, specifically Mexico, unless you intend to team up with a local agent as co-broker. If you cannot find a co-broker to do a co-listing and be your co-broker, then the best thing you can do is refer him to another agent there. If you don't know any agents in the particular city that you might be interested in, let us know. I can supply you with a list of people who I would use if I had the client that wants to buy a property in for example, in Playa del Carmen. I've got 3 extremely reliable realtors. I know a lot more people, but there's 3 of them that I prefer because I've worked with them in the past, and they're very professional. The same thing in Guadalajara, in San Miguel Allende, in Mexico City. I'm not bragging, but I've been connected with the Mexican Real Estate Association now. My gosh, it's almost 12 years. So I know a lot of people. And if you are looking for a specific agent in a particular city, I can help you with that. Here's another thing. If you are a CIPS, use your CIPS network to become to find another real estate practitioner that is also a CIPS. That's a big help also. So do not take a listing because you're not going to be able to practice real estate down there, and you're certainly not going to put up your sign in front of the property. You can't do that. That's breaking their laws. So be aware that the best thing to do is to find a co-broker, a local real estate agent, and co-broker with them. And make sure that it's an AMPI member. And one more thing, do not break the labor or the residency laws. If you want to go practice real estate down in Mexico, you want to retire and or you just want to run away from the cold. Let's say you live up in, Ely, Minnesota, and you're tired of the snow, or Alaska or whatever, then you need to make sure that you don't break the residency and their labor laws, and just do it the right way, do it the legal way. One more thing, always ask for references. Anytime that you're looking for real estate partners, ask. That's just the best way to get them. If you don't know anybody, I'm one of your resources. Contact me. Never, 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 and this I mean this with all my heart. 12 years working in the AMPI members, I understand and I can realize that these guys are professionals. They are about as professionals as you and I. And you know what's even more admirable is that these guys do an excellent job, and they don't have anywhere near the tools and the protection that we have. We have tools that protect us. We have laws that protect us. We have a code of ethics that protects us. We have a cooperation mentality that protects us. That things like that are not what do you call them, widespread in Mexico. So a lot of the agents in Mexico that are successful, all of them, every single one of them that's successful, has done it on their own, and on their own perseverance and on their own efforts, without the tools that we have. So I take my hat off to these guys. They have done successfully well without having the tools that we have. So I would never, ever, ever, ever underestimate AMPI's members' professionalism, and I encourage you also to respect them because they know what they're doing, even though they don't. Some of them may not have a license, but that does not mean that they don't know what they're doing. And finally, if you want to practice real estate in Mexico, learn Spanish. Don't insult the Mexicans by going down there and expect them to practice real estate in English. English is not the language that they speak in that country. You're going to go to Germany and you want to practice real estate, you better learn German. You want to go to Italy or you want to go to southern France, you have to master the language of the country. So please, if you're going to go and become a real estate practitioner in Mexico, please, the least you can do is learn Spanish. And then the next thing is become a legal resident. If you're a retiree, that's easy to do. But if you just want to be there and do it part-time, still find a way to become a legal resident and then learn Spanish, because it goes a long ways, a long ways. All right, any questions? If you have not received or you are thinking about getting your CIPS designation, do it. There are classes in in Dallas, in Metrotex. There are classes in Avor in San Antonio, in Austin. There are classes in Sabor in San Antonio. There's one coming up in Houston, and that's going to be on June the 18th, I believe. And it's going to be split Thursday and Friday, and then Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. The CIPS is a 5-module, it's a 5-day class, and it's only about $750. But it's the best $750 that you can spend. It's going to give you a leverage into the network of international practitioners, and it's going to give you the tools and the knowledge and the tools and the knowledge mostly, so that you can be able to understand how real estate operates in other countries. And by the way, the best thing about the CIPS is the network of there's about 4,000 CIPSs throughout the world. And that's what I look for when I'm referring somebody to another country. I look for them. I look for the CIPS members, the CIPS designees first, because I know that they have had the same amount of education that I have had. So that makes me feel comfortable when I'm handing over a client. I know that these guys will take care of it. Okay, there's my contact information, and if you guys have any questions, we still have about 10 or 12 minutes, so I'm ready. I'll be happy to take them.
Hey, Richard, one of the questions was about residency. It was about how to get residency.
How to get what?
Residency.
Well, you have to go down there and you have to solicit it. You have to be a retiree, or you have to have intent to live. And the first thing you do is whether you drive in or whether you fly in, you go to the nearest Mexican tourism office, and then you tell them that you want to change your tourist visa to a permanent resident, and then you start filling out the forms and the papers. You get an attorney, and you get somebody to sponsor you. It's a similar process, but it takes time. But it's a start. Yeah.
Perfect. A few more questions are, a comment was made that the new member form for AMPI is actually $50, just to put that out there.
Well, I think they were running a special last year, but I do not know if they're continuing. I do know that it used to be $50. In fact, it used to be $100.
Wow.
And the $100 was reduced to $50 for anybody who had the CIPS designation. However, I think that they kept that $50 discount and made it permanent. But if you still want to become a member of AMPI, let me know, and I will find out if it's the 50 or 35. But I know it's one of those two.
Perfect. Just a note to Ana Maria and Yolanda that I've taken down your information, and I'll send that to him after this webinar.
Yep.
Nora asks, when is the event in Leon?
When is the Congress in Leon?
Yes, I think so.
Okay. That's going to be on the last weekend of October. Actually, the second to the last weekend in October. It's going to be on the weekend on the 22nd, 23rd, and 24th of October.
Perfect.
We're going to confirm those dates with Tiffany at Texas Realtors, and that's probably going to be finalized within the next 30 days or so.
Excellent.
So we will have plenty of time to be able to give you a specific date, but I am pretty certain it's going to be on that next to the last weekend of October.
Great.
Yeah.
So somebody asked, as a member of NAR, can one be a member of AMPI?
Yes, AMPI International.
Perfect. And are there any questions from the local associations, those attending in person? Any other questions, everybody? I don't think I see any more here. Let me double check. Hello, can you please expand a little more on the responsibility of the lawyer and the notary?
I mean, I didn't hear the question very well.
Sure. Can you please expand a little on the responsibility of the lawyer and the notary?
Okay. The notary is an attorney. The notary is an attorney designated by the governor, who is the equivalent of the title company. He does everything that a title company here in the U.S. does. He takes he receives the earnest money. He does the property, what do you call it, the chain of ownerships investigations, the research. He makes sure that the property doesn't have any liens or encumbrances on it. And then he's the one that also, in many cases, writes up the purchase contract and writes up the deed. So the attorney, the notario is an attorney. It's just specialized in real estate transactions.
Perfect.
Did I answer the question?
I think so.
Okay.
We'll get another question probably. Oh, there are a bunch rolling in here. Do you have access by any chance to the chat feature? If you just scroll over your screen, Richard, you might be able to see these as well. Chat will be at the bottom. Bunch are rolling in, which is awesome. Thanks guys for all your questions.
The commissions, okay. The commission splits in Mexico. Here's one from Ana Maria. How much is a commission split with agents in Mexico? That's negotiable. I cannot tell you. Could be any amount. I'm not, I can't tell you that because it's negotiable. And of course, if I start talking about commissions, that would be implying that I'm colluding with people about setting commissions, so definitely no. How do you purchase property for yourself in Mexico? From Deborah. Fine, you just show up in Mexico. If you find the property, use a local agent to help you steer you through the process. But if you're a foreign national and you want to buy, say, a beachfront condo, you still have to go through the process of purchasing a trust, and which is done via an attorney, and that's about $2,500. And then there is a yearly fee for maintaining the trust active, and that's about $400 a year. But that way you can own the property. Before that law was passed, you could not even blink or think about owning a property in Mexico, in the beach or in the coast. But after the law was amended in 1992, that made it possible. But yeah, you can purchase property yourself just like you do here in the US. Just identify the property, and then find a realtor that'll help you walk through the process, and then you just find an attorney and then sign up the papers for the purchase, and then you pay cash. You get the deed at the time, and there's financing a lot. By the way, there's financing available if you live and you're drawing a salary in Mexico. If you do not live in Mexico or you do not draw a salary in Mexico, there is no way that any U.S. bank or mortgager is going to give you a mortgage. That's just not going to happen. Just for your information. If you want to buy a property in Mexico, you have to do cash. Or if you marry a local national, then you can finance it. All right, here's one. I was told we can't list properties from Mexico. Is that correct? Any chance to have a contract to be able to do marketing with Mexican properties? Yes, the answer is yes, you can list properties in Mexico, but I will tell you this, there's a caveat. Don't do it unless you talk to your broker first. You may have a broker who's not comfortable with you listing properties outside the US in any country because they may or may not want you to do that. There's an additional risk involved, and that's something that you need to discuss with your broker and make sure that the E&O insurance that your broker has is also covering you for international transactions. So the answer is, unfortunately, I can't tell you yes or no. It's not illegal, and the answer is yes, subject to making sure that you don't break any policies from your brokerage, and that you're not breaking any laws. As such, you're not breaking any laws by listing the properties because you don't have to have a license in Mexico. But if you are listing a property in Mexico and you don't know anything about the city or anything about the property, you're not doing anybody any favors. You're actually being derelict because you have to have remember the Code of Ethics requires you to have a duty of competency. So if you don't know what you're doing, then refer it. If you're familiar with the country and you speak the language and you know how to do it, still talk to your broker and make sure that you're not breaking the franchise or the broker's policies on that. Okay. All righty. Let me see. When will BSCFS in Houston? Okay, great question. I'll give you the dates right now. It's going to be on the 18th and 19th of June, and then the 22nd, 23rd, and 24th. We're doing it this way because it's easier to split the week-long class. It's a week-long class. It's easier to split it in with the weekend in between, because that way most people really didn't want to be away from their office for a whole week. But this way they can do they do Thursdays and Fridays, which is the 18th and the 19th. And then they do Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday for the following 3 modules. Excuse me. And it's a lot easier to be out of the office for 3 or 4 days, or excuse me, for 2 or 3 days than it is for a whole week. So again, the dates are 18 and 19, 22, 23, and 24. Alejandro says that all panelists, the AMPI Summit in Mazatlan starts on March 20, actually starts on the 25th. You want to go in there on the date, on the morning or the afternoon of the 25th, because they have what they call an icebreaker. And if I tell you, I've been to a lot of these icebreakers, and they are a lot of fun. They have food, music, camaraderie. It's just wonderful. If you're going to go and you want to start building the relationship with some of the agents, just show up to these events. That's how I started it. When I got my CIPS in 2003, the first thing I did, I went to a real estate trade show in Mexico City, and that's how I started meeting people. This is back in 2004. That was 16 years ago. So it takes a while to build up that portfolio of friends and referrals, but it's doable. All right, here you go. I see San Diego, California Realtor signs in Tijuana. Century 21 Remax. Well, Century 21 is a franchise, and if you see a sign in Century 21, it doesn't mean it's a San Diego Realtor. It could be a Mexican City Realtor, a Mexico Realtor who is a member of Century 21, and also Remax. Century 21, Keller Williams, Coldwell Banker, they all have offices and franchises operating in Mexico. So it doesn't mean that there are agents from the U.S. putting their signs in Mexico. It just means that the Mexican agent is member of the franchise of one of the U.S. franchises. So they could be co-broker with the Tijuana agent. I don't know. And if it's an effective way to sell a Tijuana property, of course. If you want to list a property outside of the U.S., remember the advice. Do a 3-way listing agreement between you, the local co-broker, because you really need boots on the ground there, and then the owner of the property. It's got to be a 3-way listing agreement signed by you, the co-broker of the subject country, and of course the owner of the property. But don't do that unless you clear with your broker, okay? I don't want you to go around telling all brokers, oh, Richard said I could do this. The first thing that I would do is talk to your broker, make sure that you're not breaking any policies or anything like that. From Susie, gracias, Richard, una presentación impecable. Oh, thank you. So they should congratulate me for the webinar. My pleasure, Susie, anytime. Okay, let me see if I missed anything. Let me go up here. Oh yeah, how is residency defined? Every state in Mexico has a different residency requirement, but I think you have to be there like for 2 years or less. I haven't tried it yet. I've got to admit, I'm thinking about it, but I haven't actually done my homework in terms of the residency. But Mexico Mexico can give you the residency if you are actually proof to them that you can be a retiree, and to be able to get your status as retiree, or in Spanish they call it jubilado. All you have to do is present documentation that you're receiving an annuity, say your Social Security or maybe a retirement fund from your former employer, that is a minimum of $1,000 a month, and then they'll give you the permanent residency as a jubilado. And then from there, you can just move on to different stages of the residency until you get they have an equivalent of a green card that we did for the Mexicans, but it's not a green card, it's just the equivalent. And that gives you that gives you a permanent residency after you have been in the state for a certain amount of time. Okay. Any other questions? I think that's it.
Fantastic. And if you did have a question in here or you didn't have a chance to be
Oh, wait.
Oh, sorry.
Deborah says, question, my husband is a Mexican citizen. Is this different? Well, if your husband is a Mexican citizen, it gives you a lot more opportunities than if you were not married to a Mexican citizen, because he can own property. He can set up the residency for you a lot easier than somebody who's just fresh from, off the airplane. So having a spouse who is a Mexican national is a big help. You're halfway there already.
Excellent. If you had any questions that you didn't have an opportunity to ask here today, send them my way. My name is Emma Vandelander. You can find my info on the Texas Realtors website, and I will, for those of you who wanted me to reach out to Richard with the emails, I have taken all those down and I'll send those to you, Richard. Thank you for a fantastic webinar. This was wonderful and the engagement is awesome from you guys. And just another note, this will be recorded and uploaded to YouTube on the Texas Realtor channel, and it will be on the past webinars website on the Texas Realtors site. So thank you, Richard.
You're very welcome. My pleasure. Thanks to all of you who listened to me for an hour. I know you had other things to do, but I do appreciate you spending an hour with me. Thanks a lot.
Enjoyed it. Have a good one, everybody.
Bye-bye.